Hello and welcome to Think Watercolour. Today's demonstration is a very quick sketch of the River Bollin in Cheshire. And it's just a simple country scene with the river in the foreground, a few distant trees and hills. Just very simple painting to do. Starting off with a mixture of cerulean blue and a touch of cobalt blue just to darken it slightly. And I'm painting on dry paper. This is Saunders Waterford 300-gram rough paper. And I'm going to start with the sky, keeping it fairly dark at the top, very loose. No real plan, just want to create some white cloud shapes. Maybe leave a few hard edges. I've got my board flat because I don't want the pigment to run down. I want to keep it fairly dark at the top and maybe get a bit lighter as it comes down the page. Just suggesting some broken cloud shapes here and there, and I'll soften some of the edges with some clean water in a sec. Essentially I want it to be a bank of white clouds in the distance, so I'm just going to clean my brush and just with a damp brush soften some of these edges. Not too much water. Leave a few hard edges here and there. And that should do for the sky. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to paint some distant hills. Again, nothing too specific. I'll mix up just add a little bit of burnt sienna to the sky mix. A bit more cobalt blue just to make a sort of a bluey grey for the distant hills. Maybe a little bit bluer, I think. Keeping it fairly vague. Again, varying the colours a little bit, just adding a little bit of cobalt teal to the mix just to have a bit of variety. These are distant hills, so I want them to dry fairly light, but not too light. They're not that far away. Come down to the trees, maybe a little bit lighter behind the trees. I'm just going to soften some of the edges as if the clouds just clipping the tops of the hills in a few places, keeping a few hard edges again. And then while that's going to let that dry, I'll soften that there a little bit. Just going to paint the water, the river. Again, I'm going to use some cobalt blue and a little bit of teal in the mixture, just at the far end of the river. This is going to dry much lighter, so I'm aware of that. I'm just going to soften this and leave an area of clear paper It's a reflection of part of the sky, and then going to put a little bit more blue in the mix, and maybe a touch of pyrrole orange, just for this slightly shady area here, in the which I want to show in the foreground. Again, just lightening it to the left a little bit. For the underpainting of the trees, I'm just mixing up some yellow ochre, reasonably weak. It's just the initial wash for where the trees are. Everything else is dried now, so I'm quite happy to just loosely indicate the tree trunks. And there I've made a mistake, so I'm just going to lift that out. This is just a background colour for when I put the darker tones on the tree trunks. I want them to be in slightly silhouette, but want some light patches as well, so just keep it simple. So I'll use the same yellow ochre, slightly stronger mix for the just the bank of the river on the other side. It's a little bit sandy, the sandbank. The same on the left hand side. Okay, for the foreground trees I'm going to mix up some sap green. A tiny amount of cobalt blue. Just going to loosely drop these in. Just along the edge of the tree line there. I think I'll come forward with this as well for the grassy area behind these foreground trees. Same on the other bank. I'll just carry that across all the way. A little bit of reflection in the river there. Just going to add some jadeite green to the sage green mix, just to darken it. Start to drop in some suggestion of darker patches here and there, leaving some light areas too. Just softening that reflection in the river. Just take a little bit of that out with a bit of paper towel. It's fine. Just drop in some while it's wet, you can drop in some darker colours. As long as the paper's wet, you can do this. If you leave it till it's just damp, you could end up with cauliflowers, depending on the amount of pigment on your brush. Just add a touch of Prussian blue to the mix. A little bit too bluish, so we'll add a little bit of maybe some, yeah, that's better. It's a touch of yellow ochre there, just for the darkest areas of the trees, the base of the trees. A few darker patches higher up, but mostly at the base. Going to soften that edge a bit with some water. Just lift out a little bit. Maybe darken that area there a little bit more. Just added a bit more yellow ochre just to darken this sort of muddy sand bank on the left. Same on the other side of the bank, just darken it a little bit. Maybe take that round as well. Okay. Just making sure it's soft edges. It's where the sand meets the water, so there will be a slightly hard edge, but I'm going to add that later. I'm just going to let that dry. Okay, for the tree trunks and the branches, I mixed up some ultramarine with some burnt sienna to create this quite strong brown, almost black colour for the tree trunks, as I say. So just I want to leave the left-hand side of the trunks a little bit lighter in places, just to suggest that there's some light coming in from the left. If you want to get a thinner line with a larger brush, like this is a number 12 Escoda, just hold it vertically and you can get some, as long as you've got enough water pigment in your brush, you can get some nice shapes. To suggest branches. going to add a little bit more blue to the mix for this foreground area. That's a bit too blue. Let's add a little bit more sienna. That's a bit. Just want to create this foreground is almost in silhouette. So I'm making this up as I go along, really. It's just based on a view along the Bollin. So it's not exactly real, but just trying to keep the base of this area nice and dark. I may have to add some pigment later, but for the moment we're okay, I think. And to create a sort of a dappled effect, I'm just going to use this brush just to create this sort of dappling effect with a little bit of light and dark here and there. It's all about contrast. Once you paint these foreground darks in, and while it's still wet, I can add more dark here. It just creates that nice contrast between what's close to you and what's further away. Again, it's not too specific, it's just a very loose, quick demonstration, this. Okay. I'm going to use just the point of the brush again. Hold it vertical. You don't have to be too close to the paper. The further up the shaft you hold it, the less precision you have, and it's much freer. If you hold it down the shaft, you can be really careful, but if you hold it up the shaft, it's gives you the chance to be a little bit more creative with the edge of this sandbank. Same on the other side. Again, not being too finicky. As long as I hold the brush vertically, I can have a bit more control over the line I'm making. Just going to put some horizontal streaks in to suggest some ripples in the water. Nothing too specific again. Trick is not to go over the top. And the further away, the thinner they get. So again, you can get a nice thin line with quite a big brush. Put a bit more pressure on in places and you get these slightly thicker lines, darker. I just want this to be a little bit darker in this corner. It's all about knowing when to stop with watercolour. That's enough fiddling with that area. Okay. That's all dry now, so I'm just going to paint these leaves at the top of the tree. I'm using this detail brush which holds a fair bit of pigment, and it's got a nice flexible tip to it, so you can just dab away and create these loose leaf shapes and lumps of leaves and branches and twigs and things. So starting with a fairly weak mix of burnt sienna, and I'm going to drop in some these jadeite green with a little touch of sap green. Again, I want these to be a little bit in silhouette, letting the colours mix on the paper and blend together. Just adding a little bit of ultramarines for the really darker areas. Again, once these colours mix together, they blend and create different shades of green, and just want to suggest some branches coming further out and a few leaves hanging down from these longer branches higher up. A few clumps of leaves lower down the tree trunk. Bit more ultramarine in there, just darken some of those areas. Don't want them drying too light. The idea is, as I said, I keep saying, create this sort of silhouette. Okay, just going to darken some of these tree trunks in places, just to delineate them a little bit better. I'm just going to paint some tree trunks of the middle distance trees. Again, using this number 12 Escoda. Keep it nice and vertical. Simple touches, just enough pigment on the brush to create these nice thin lines. Same on this left hand bank as well, just a few middle ground trees. And using the same mix, just strengthen the edge of the bank a little bit in places. And I'll let those dry. I'm just going to darken the shadows under the trees on those distant trees a little bit. I think it's dried a little bit too light for me, so just add a little bit more depth shadow under the tree line. Again, making sure that the reflection's there too. For the mid-ground trees, I'm using a mixture of sap green, jadeite green, and a touch of ultramarine, and various shades. Again, these are in the mid-ground, so I want them to be darker than the background trees, but not so dark as to pull them too far forward. However, again, just using this detail brush to indicate the shapes of the trees. Same on this side. Leave a few gaps at the top for light shining through the clumps of leaves. Again, adding some darker tones with a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine, just for the shadows. Letting it mix on the page a little bit. Same on the left. Say I don't want these to dry too dark, but when you're mixing watercolour you have to go a little bit darker than you think you need to, otherwise you're going to end up with things drying too light. So when you're mixing on your palette, when you think you've got the colour right, just make it a touch darker, and you will find that things work out a lot better in your watercolour then. Not forgetting it's on the ground below these trees there is shadow, so I'll just loosely indicate that. And while that's drying, I'm just going to darken these foreground trees. I've dried a little bit light, so we just add a touch of ultramarine and some burnt sienna, let that mix on the page. It's leaves anyway, just darken it. And with a rigger, I'm going to paint the thinner branches at the top of these left-hand trees. And if I hold the rigger at the end of the shaft, I can use the flexibility of the springiness of the brush to just indicate a few branches. Again, nothing too specific. A couple in the background maybe going up behind these trees. Again, the trick is not to overdo it. Know when to stop. So I'm just going to let that dry and see how it looks. Okay, I've let all the washes dry now, and I just feel that on the right hand side it just could do with being a little stronger. Not too much, just enough to add balance. Again, just strengthen the shadows under the trees, make them less one tone. Shadows do vary. and just add a little bit more to the underside of these mid-ground trees. And finally, we just touch of light red, which is quite a strong mix, so fairly heavy in pigment. I just want to just indicate a little bit more of tree trunk at the front here, places. Just enough to bring it forward, and then using some imperial purple, which probably seems strange, but it does work. Just paint it wet in wet, let it blend a little bit, just to strengthen the base of this tree, which is in fairly deep silhouette, and just darken these bits of leaf and bits of twig sticking up. Again, I'll use the tip of my number 12, holding it vertically just to get these thinner lines, just to create that silhouette. Maybe just a few more patches up here that a bit could do with being darker. A few minor little streaks just lifting out with the damp brush. And I think I'm finished. Thank you so much for watching this demonstration. I hope you found it useful. It's just a quick sketch of a river scene. If you found it useful, do give it a like. It always helps with YouTube. And if you're not a subscriber, do subscribe and hit the notification bell for future videos. I try to post once a week if I can, but sometimes with things like the Easter holidays, I end up missing a week, so forgive me for that. And thanks again for watching.